Case study. Sticky bastards. While you and I are fabulously and mutually growing in our knowledge and expertise of the shape-shifting of the minutiae of our chosen environments, engaged as we are in the happy recreating of ourselves into the kind of universes we want to be, with eyes and ears and senses all seeing and hearing and, well, sensing our way towards that happy, never quite finished line, it's not a bad idea at this stage to pause and reflect on those energies that simply refuse to be budged. Such reflection stops us from indulging in too much hubris as we wend our way to our inevitable awesomeness. But most importantly, lets us know when it becomes acceptable to throw our hands in the air and state, "Okay, that's it, I give up." In which case, you and I can retire to the veranda, pour ourselves a lemonade, and ruminate on how exactly we were quite so brilliant as to get where we are, right here, right now, in the first place. Committed to the super fast slipstream to ultimate cosmic yahoo-ness as we are, it's often hard for us slobs to accept that sometimes, but not often, the very houses we live in and the grounds they are built on can be like belligerent elephants stuffed full of poop and refusing, despite whatever it is we do, to be cosmically enemized. In which case, this has really not much to do with us anymore. At least the part of us that has no time anymore for the apparently outside of us, which refuses to play ball, because it's now so very seemingly outside of us, it really isn't a hell of a lot of fun to play with, and sometimes really no fun at all. Not that it's not worth a go. The flexing of our Bambi, tricksy, greggious cosmic muscles can be very gratifying if it doesn't kick us in the ass, and one should never be afraid of checking tricky things out in the Rubik's Cube that is our ever-shifting current, here I am in this body life. So with that in mind, one super terrific illustration of how accumulated energy from other sources beyond yourself can create an unexpected and unwanted parasitical relationship, much like a battery being unexpectedly shoved inside a flashlight and subsequently finding its own energy sucked out while enabling the overriding instrument to illuminate itself, is when my good friends Cabby and Lang pulled me into Ghost Bust, an extremely haunted house in Bel Air. Yeah, you heard it right. I'm a bona fide Hollywood Ghostbuster. We were on paper the perfect trio for such an adventure. Cabby, a burly, take no prisoners, no bullshit kind of guy who talked like a truck driver but had an incredibly sensitive core and truly did see dead people, most often in annoying places like the supermarket or the toilet. Frankly, Cabby didn't want to have anything to do with them. He wanted to be a chef instead, and spent much of his money-spinning time as a massage therapist annoyed at having to yank the nasty critters and crapola spirit refugees that clung to his clients' bodies off of them, never giving away the true reason why their neck and back pain suddenly and completely disappeared as he sharply banished the little bastards into the light. Lang, one of the kindest people I ever met, whose passion was writing, earned her way as a dominatrix, and while her clients thought that she was beating the shit out of them by their own demand, in alter reality, she was pounding the bejesus out of the waywards clinging onto their energy fields, making sure the annoying creeps were well and truly thwarted from manipulating their host into playing out their nastiness in the everyday world. And then there was me, with my pragmatic and somewhat, you might have guessed, acerbic attitude to the whole shebang. My spiritual sarcasm, the natural afterbirth of having my entire material universe collapse into dust. This punch-drunk suspicion of all things supernatural was weirdly enough contradicted by the sudden appearance of, in my home of 10 years, a ghost child who suddenly decided to take up residence and change everything I believed about the afterlife. That's a whole other story, or a TV series or something. Get your agent to call me. The mansion we were brought into Ghost Bust was owned by a famous Hollywood director who lived there with his gorgeous, almost actress wife and their 2 small children. Built in the 1920s, it was a legendary den of iniquity, with the glitterati and the literati and those hanger-on types who crave if not fame, sucking on the appropriate energy fields of the above. And while the infamy of booze-swilling debauchery and flapper-time hedonism sounded like wonderful Tinseltown dinner conversation, the reality was that, despite the current family's seemingly idyllic lifestyle and the external beauty of the house, deep problems lurked within. When any brand of energy is repeated enough, it creates what I can only describe as a self-perpetuating cyclone of feeling, which is why you can walk into a room and know immediately what's going on or what's been going on. And we should all pay attention to that shit because we generally don't, and it's highly useful. So as far as the energy field in this house was concerned, the party was never going to finish, nor were the leftovers of the party, the toxic underlying anger, the physical violations, and in my opinion, some very real skeletons under the floorboards who were bursting to make their presences known. As a result of the elephant continually pooping inside itself until its guts were about to bust, the place was spiritually reeking, and not one but several very entitled-feeling entities inhabited it, leaving a massive dung heap stink of capital letter creepy proportions. This kind of afterlife, beyond life mob mentality is a real thing, and it's up to us to decide whether we can be arsed to engage in it or not. Because us slobs generally have better fish to fry than to try cooking up some crappy old cadaver just for shits and giggles. But as I say, we do like to flex, and if the engagement in such sport is invigorating rather than resulting in us dramatically but uselessly shoving crosses up our fannies like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, so be it. On the other side, whatever that is, where the mob is a decomposed, drooling mess and there's no one left in the club wearing a Voice of Reason badge, all that's required for that ancient, sick-soaked engine to grease itself up again is an appropriate meat battery. And hey, presto! The party continues! If you call a bunch of festering critters both once human and never human vomiting shit energy on themselves and everything around them a party. Understanding mob mentality in our oh-so-easygoing slob world is a good thing. The sheer buzz of enjoying energy, good or bad, zapping around and recognizing itself, is why crowds love to gather for the excitement of the game, why walking into a sex club pretty much instantly gives you a boner, and why riots, well, become riots. But being sucked into useless energetic fields is the antithesis of what we are all about. Ancient battles will continue, and mob mentality can only be altered by altering our individual energy fields. And that, my friends, is both our power and our pleasure. The infinite satisfaction of not attaching ourselves to gunk that just ain't serving us. In the Bel Air mansion, the uber-successful and wealthy and seemingly happy-go-lucky family found themselves resuming their own old struggles with addictions and the darker side of fun, in that crazy, codependent way that enables such tornadoes of energy to exist. But it was only after a few too many instances of their very large dogs being flung across the living room by the unseen nasties, and the nightly wake-up calls from the kids screaming as a result of a particularly ghastly ghost man hovering above them in their bedroom, that it was agreed that the party just had to stop. Apparently, prior to us, the director and his almost actress wife had flown a famous spiritualist in from Italy, renowned for her ability to rid places of their toxic, unseen inhabitants. She had finally reached the room downstairs, the epicenter of ick, kind of like that closet in Poltergeist, and soon after ran out of the house screaming and terrified, refusing to ever return. So of course it seemed obvious to call three relatively inexperienced busters such as Cabby, Lang and myself onto the scene. In typical Hollywood fashion, Cabby had recently acted with the wife of the director in some TV series, at which time she had revealed her plight to him. Cabby, being a pushover, agreed to check it all out, and had invited Lang, who was a shoo-in. After all, she was living in her ragged, once-famous deco apartment with the ghost of one of Errol Flynn's dead lovers, who'd hover over her as she lay in bed, rolling his eyes dramatically and ultimately resorting, after her disinterest in his antics, to flicking the lights on and off relentlessly and moving cans of beans around on the countertop. Lang was au fait with eccentric afterlives and was as fascinated by their personalities as she was by the guys wanting to sniff her feet for cash. As for me, I was unemployed, destitute, and so pissed off with all things spiritual that I was the perfect no it ain't card to ground things. Grounding being a very much needed quality in order to have a hope in Hades of finally ridding that place of its great unwanted. On the outside, the site of our would-be ghost-busting mission was the kind of picture-perfect residence you'd see in a movie. A long wooded driveway wound its way to the top of the Bel Air Hills, opening up to a stunning Spanish hacienda surrounded by lush gardens, flanked by an enormous lagoon of a swimming pool, with tennis courts akimbo and several guest houses linked by jasmine-covered archways. But despite all of its exterior glamour, a melancholic atmosphere permeated the grounds, as tangible and as pungent as the infected gonads of a Namibian wildebeest. Meanwhile, the inside of the place was a sunless, confusing network of corridors, a rambling labyrinth of a house that seemed to have a life of its own, seemingly dictating the style of its furnishings to its owners. As we've already discussed, the objects that adorn our worlds, or don't, both express and create in a very real way the energy that surrounds us, and inevitably, whether we want them to or not, ultimately expresses us. And in that knowledge lies the very medicine within the enema that releases the stuffed-up elephant of my previous metaphor. While the family could have chosen any kind of artwork to hang there, despite their own apparently upbeat personalities, lining the endless hallways were extraordinarily expensive museum-worthy paintings of somber women with those creepy eyes that follow you gazes, and every painting was a dark, heavy, watchful, or strangely helpless vision of naked, victimized women sprawled on some ancient battlefield or lying tragically across some craggy rock. At the bottom of the spiraling stairs, the dark epicenter of the house was a yuck-soaked, nasty-ass, heartless place, buried a floor below in the worst room I've ever set my foot in. A brooding, wood-paneled place, ironically called the entertainment room, though the kind of entertainment that had gone on through the years was easily felt, and most likely still being played out in other dimensions, as we examined its eerie-eyed, gargoyle-flanked fireplace and satanic-feeling Gothic adornments. As Cabby dealt with the lunging deads and the onslaught of questionable neverborns and Lang sucked up and discarded emotions and energies the size of the cosmos, while I begrudgingly punched it out with the almighty fuck you asshole residue beyond that, it became exceedingly apparent that the awesome awfulness that had obviously been a part of the house since far before it was built was so thick and so tangible that no amount of sage intent or command could possibly discreate it. Having said that, if I'd have known then what I know now, I would have taken every piece of evil-eyed portraiture, every gnarly, nasty wooden, dragon-like fireplace flanking flourish, every bitterly placed chunk of furniture that adorned that hell vessel, and chucked it all into a skip and given them the thumbs up to take it all away. And then, motherfucker, let's just see what you can cling on to then, eh? But clinging on is ultimately not what we are about, and no A-bomb of energy needed to extricate the property's demons would have been worth getting in the way of our happy hour. Interestingly enough, it was the kitchen, the smallest room in the giant mansion, that was the only refuge. A jolly, colourful place filled with copper pots and warm wooden surfaces, the kitchen was the only agreed expression of the family's taste, and therefore devoid of the nasty vibes running rampant everywhere else. The daily, continual presence of all the family members being there together created a much-needed energy island that allowed the most normal and congenial parts of themselves to breathe. While our ghost-busting episode left the place peaceful for a few days, it was not long afterwards that the otherworldly grisliness picked up pace and intensity, and as far as I know remains there to this very day. So if your kitchen is the only place that expresses you, and your dogs continue to fly through the air through the rest of the place, and you find yourself overwhelmed with an unhealthy attraction to dressing yourself up in beef jerky, and the Pope pisses his pants upon entering your door, perhaps it's simply just time to move. That's certainly what us slobs would do, and I highly recommend taking the easy road in these issues. Mob mentality simply aren't us. And so before we even start shifting and sucking and scraping and exfoliating, let's make sure we're in the right place for the right reasons, with a fridge that works and a basement full of beer, instead of crazy-arsed, energy-sucking, nightmare-making boogers.